When I started, I deliberately wanted to do stuff that wasn't Saudi Arabia because I wanted to be aware of what was going on. As we talked before, with dictatorships, you feel like you're living in this really tight little bubble. And so when I left that bubble, I really wanted to know what's happening everywhere else around me, to be able to connect it to what was happening in Saudi Arabia. So I didn't want to be pigeonholed as, oh, just the Saudi journalist. I wanted to actually fully experience and work in other countries. And so I went to the West Bank and Gaza and Kabul and Congo, and so I went to a lot, and I must say it was an amazing experience, because then you can bring all of that back, and then you can connect the dots in ways that if you only stayed in this one country, you wouldn't be able to see. You wouldn't be able to see patterns that if you only covered this one country, I think you become really obsessive, and you think nothing happens the same as in your country, like your country has the worst whatever, right? But actually, we're just talking about Belarus, they're a really bad situation, right? But if you didn't connect, then you wouldn't be aware that actually dictatorships have patterns. Dictatorships do things certain ways, and you can learn a lot from that. So I'm very glad I decided to do that.
So you started as journalism but became a filmmaker?
Yes, also by accident. I was covering Yemen for a while, and a journalist friend was asked to do a documentary, but I was a producer, and they gave me a crash course for 2 days and said, here's a camera, go do a film. And that's how it happened, because the security situation was so difficult that we couldn't have had a proper crew. So the only way we could have done it is if we only two went there. And so that's how I made my first film, Al-Qaeda in Yemen. So it was baptism by fire, basically. So, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about that film, and what story did it tell?
So we did that film in 2012, and so at the time, after post-revolutionary Yemen, when Ali Saleh, the president at the time, was forced to resign, there was a lot of security problems in Yemen. And so Al-Qaeda was already there from before, but because there was such a security gap, they spread significantly inside South Yemen, and they actually declared a state. And this is before there was any such thing as the Islamic State and ISIS and all that. And so we went to investigate the depth of that, and why were people from the secessionist movement, who were a peaceful movement, joining extreme organizations like Al-Qaeda. And it was fascinating and heartbreaking, because and this is the pattern that's been going on in the Arab world, and I'm sure in other areas, where you have peaceful protesters, peaceful political movements that keep being pushed and pushed and pushed, and put in prison and disappeared and tortured and killed, and then by the end of it, the fringes are what's left, right? And so this is what's happening in Yemen in 2012, and what's happening now as well. I mean, in much worse circumstances. So all these people start joining the fringes because they believe they're the ones who are able to do real change. And to them, change is better than the stagnation they're in. And this is what's happening now. And so ISIS or Al-Qaeda are not a mystery. It's like, we were talking about them like, how could anybody join such an organization? If you look at what the realities on the ground of the same people who've been trying to have real peaceful reform in the country are being ignored or marginalized, then this is what's going to be left. And sadly, we're still dealing with the same issues. When the uprising started to happen from Tunis to Egypt to Libya, I went and I covered all those, and then I went to Bahrain, and I heard that there was something happening in Saudi Arabia, and I came to Saudi, and at that moment, after seeing so much bravery in Libya, and in Tunis, and Egypt, and Bahrain, and Yemen, I felt really bad, and I felt actually ashamed that I couldn't honestly continue working the way I was, ignoring what's happening in Saudi Arabia, because at that point I knew for a fact that nobody was going to properly cover Saudi Arabia because it hasn't been happening. And also seeing everybody else taking really courageous decisions, life and death decisions, to play a role in change in the region, I felt like I needed to do that as well. And this is why I decided that it's time to do stories on Saudi Arabia. But I didn't want to do, why women can't drive in Saudi Arabia, or the cliche stories of Saudi Arabia. I wanted to do something different. And I knew the protests that were starting in Saudi was something important, even if it didn't have the traction of what happened in Egypt or in Libya or in Yemen or in Syria. It is an important thing. It's a historical moment. Never have there been protests for so long in the history of Saudi Arabia. In the entire history of Saudi Arabia, never have there been continuous protests for 3 years. And so that deserves time. That deserves to be documented, whether it goes anywhere or not, or it just completely disappears, because the government has been brilliant in how they shut down those protests. I mean, this is our jobs as journalists. I mean, we are the real life historians. Yes, I mean, if we don't document this, then how would anybody afterwards be able to document this?
Then the problem with these incredibly dangerous jobs is that people don't want to send you into those places to tell those stories.
Yeah.
And so you were talking also about that cycle. So it's that sort of the risk factor in your job is massive and influences everything from your own personal feelings to actually the possibility of the story being sort of commissioned in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the challenge of working in a front line is easier to handle than the undercover stories, because the front line is clear. It is here. Somebody's going to shoot at you. You can see it. There are real dangers of a war zone, but it's immediate, and then you move away from it, and that's it. Right? With undercover stories like the one I did in Saudi, it's all in your head. It's all this emotional waiting for somebody to come arrest you. It's waiting for somebody you've spoken to be arrested because of you. It's every time you cross a checkpoint, because the area where the protests are happening are surrounded by checkpoints. And so every time I crossed one of these checkpoints, I wonder if it's going to be the day that I'm going to be arrested and I'm going to get everybody I've ever talked to into trouble. You know, like, in all of this in my head. In the end, I was able to leave without any of this. But to the last moment, you don't know. Like, at one point, I was crossing the checkpoint and they stopped the car. And they want to know the driver's where his papers. In Saudi, obviously, women can't drive, so I had to have a driver. I had to have a freelance, illegal driver, because I didn't live in the country, and so there was no way for me to actually get a driver full time for the period. Anyway, so logistical problems, blah blah, and then they stop him. But when they did, at that moment, I didn't know if they stopped him because of me or stopped him because of him. And it was just like this moment of just like, I froze, and I'm like, okay, this is it. This is the moment I get arrested. And it wasn't. It was simply because of his paperwork. But it's all in your head in a way, and it eats you.